Thank you for coming in today, Harry. I was a bit worried about you with this bad thunderstorm. I'm glad you were able to make it here with no problems. Why don't you take a seat? My secretary Mabel will bring us some coffee. Black, right? Harry, as always, our conversation today is confidential. I'm going to refer to my notes to make sure I don't forget anything. And also, please feel free to take any notes or ask any and all questions that you might have. As I promised on the phone, we'd sit face to face to discuss what I learned about how the Supreme Court viewed your situation. It also makes sense to review our next steps. First, I know you've been anxiously awaiting to hear the decision. Unfortunately, Harry, I have some tough news. Their decision was not what we had hoped for. In fact, it overturned almost a century of tradition. So let me explain what that means as I walk through their reasoning and why they decided the Pennsylvania law should be the standard and why they decided to send your case back to the Court of Appeals. So when this process started, if you recall, we discussed your options about whether to file your lawsuit in Pennsylvania or whether or not we should file it in the federal court in New York. Under Pennsylvania law, it would have been more difficult to prove Erie was responsible in a legal sense versus under the federal law. And so we talked about, how for a very long time, federal laws have trumped state laws in such situations. So you chose the New York federal court after hearing about those options. And of course, you're aware that after learning they would need to pay you $30,000, Erie was still decided to fight. And so that's how the case ended up all the way in the Supreme Court. So in thinking about that path, let's talk about the Supreme Court decision. They decided a new path needed to be taken. Very, very different from, in fact, the opposite of how they traditionally ruled when we had discussed those options. The new path is that the state law trumps the federal law, not the other way around, and therefore your case would need to be looked at under that Pennsylvania lens. Of course, you want to know, why now? Why me? Well, I'm prepared to discuss that with you. What the court said was that in order to level the playing field and more evenly apply justice, they needed to make this change. Now, they want to stop people from comparing which court might have the better outcome, making a wise decision about that, and letting that influence their choice of the court. They basically want the courts to judge situations according to how the state would have viewed them, even in the federal system. Once again, a complete flip. I certainly did not anticipate such an unprecedented change. For better or worse, Harry, your case has made history. So what that means now is that the $30,000 judgment you received has been reversed. And now the Court of Appeals will have to look at your case fresh through the lens of the Pennsylvania law. The next step is to vigorously fight for you in that Court of Appeals so that you can receive every possible chance of holding Erie accountable, even under that tougher Pennsylvania law. Nothing about this has been easy, as you know. I'll be candid, this next step is going to be challenging. I know you're disappointed, as am I, in this setback, but I'll continue to work with you to help bring Erie to justice.